Chapter 4. 4 types of emotionally immature parents. There are different types of emotionally immature parents, but all can cause loneliness and insecurity in children. There's basically one way to provide nurturing love, but many ways to frustrate a child's need for love. In this chapter, we'll look at all 4 different types of parents, each with a particular brand of emotional immaturity. Although each type is emotionally insensitive in a different way, all create emotional insecurity in their children. Despite their different styles, all 4 types have the same underlying emotional immaturity. All tend to be self-involved, narcissistic, and emotionally unreliable. All share the common traits of egocentricity, insensitivity, and a limited capacity for genuine emotional intimacy. All use non-adaptive coping mechanisms that distort reality rather than dealing with it. And all use their children to try to make themselves feel better, often leading to a parent-child role reversal and exposing their children to adult issues in an overwhelming way. In addition, all 4 types have poor resonance with other people's feelings. They have extreme boundary problems, either getting too involved or refusing to get involved at all. Most tolerate frustration poorly and use emotional tactics or threats rather than verbal communication to get what they want. All 4 types of parents resist seeing their children as separate individuals and instead relate to them strictly on the basis of their own needs. And with all 4 styles, children end up feeling de-selfed because their needs and interests are eclipsed by what's important to their parents. Before we explore the 4 types, however, let's take a brief moment to look at previous research that studied the effects of different types of parenting on quality of attachment behavior in babies. How different types of parenting affect infant attachment. Mary Ainsworth, Sylvia Bell, and Imelda Staten conducted famous infant attachment research that has been replicated many times over the years. Part of their research involved observing and identifying maternal characteristics that were associated with either secure or insecure attachment behaviors in babies. As summarized in their 1974 article, these researchers rated mothers' behaviors toward their babies on 4 dimensions: sensitivity, insensitivity, acceptance, rejection, cooperation, interference, and accessible, ignoring. They found that a mother's degree of sensitivity was a key variable, in the sense that mothers who rated high in sensitivity also, without exception, rated high in acceptance, cooperation, and accessibility, whereas mothers who rated low in any one of the other 3 scales also rated low in sensitivity. Ainsworth and her colleagues reported that more sensitive mothers had babies who showed more secure attachment behaviors in their experiments. Here's how these researchers described the sensitive mothers of babies who showed secure attachment behaviors. In summary, highly sensitive mothers are usually accessible to their infants and are aware of even their more subtle communications, signals, wishes, and moods. In addition, these mothers accurately interpret their perceptions and show empathy with their infants. The sensitive mother, armed with this understanding and empathy, can time her interactions well and deal with her baby so that her interactions seem appropriate in kind as well as in quality, and prompt. However, the behavior of mothers who had babies showing insecure attachment behaviors were very different. Thinking back to chapters 2 and 3 of this book, determine if the following description of insensitive mothers from Mary Ainsworth and her colleagues reminds you of characteristics of what I am calling emotionally immature parents. In contrast, mothers with low sensitivity are not aware of much of their infant's behavior, either because they ignore the baby or they fail to perceive in his activity the more subtle and hard-to-detect communications. Furthermore, insensitive mothers often do not understand those aspects of their infant's behavior of which they are aware, or else they distort it. A mother may have somewhat accurate perceptions of her infant's activity and moods, but may be unable to empathize with him. Through either lack of understanding or empathy, mothers with low sensitivity improperly time their responses, either in terms of scheduling, or in terms of promptness to the baby's communications. Further, mothers with low sensitivity often have inappropriate responses in kind as well as in quantity, meaning interactions which are fragmented and poorly resolved. These research findings support the idea that a mother's levels of sensitivity and empathy strongly affect the quality of the baby's attachment behaviors in the mother-child relationship. The 4 types of emotionally immature parents. Keeping in mind this previous research on infant attachment, let's now take a look at what I've categorized as the 4 main types of emotionally immature parents, who are all especially likely to create feelings of insecurity in their children. Although each type undermines a child's emotional security in different ways, all of them relate to their children with limited empathy and unreliable emotional support, and their fundamental lack of sensitivity is the same. Also be aware that each type exists along a continuum, from mild to severe, with varying degrees of narcissism. In severe cases, the parent may be mentally ill, or physically or sexually abusive. Emotional parents are run by their feelings, swinging between over-involvement and abrupt withdrawal. They are prone to frightening instability and unpredictability. Overwhelmed by anxiety, they rely on others to stabilize them. They treat small upsets like the end of the world and see other people as either rescuers or abandoners. Driven parents are compulsively goal-oriented and super busy. They can't stop trying to perfect everything, including other people. Although they rarely pause long enough to have true empathy for their children, they are controlling and interfering when it comes to running their children's lives. Passive parents have a laissez-faire mindset and avoid dealing with anything upsetting. They're less obviously harmful than the other types, but they have their own negative effects. They readily take a back seat to a dominant mate, even allowing abuse and neglect to occur by looking the other way. They cope by minimizing problems and acquiescing. Rejecting parents engage in a range of behaviors that make you wonder why they have a family in the first place. Whether their behavior is mild or severe, they don't enjoy emotional intimacy and clearly don't want to be bothered by children. Their tolerance for other people's needs is practically nil, and their interactions consist of issuing commands, blowing up, or isolating themselves from family life. Some of the milder types may engage in stereotyped family activities, but they still show little closeness or real engagement. They mostly want to be left alone to do their thing. As you hear the following descriptions, keep in mind that some parents are a blend of types. While most parents tend to fall into one category, any may be prone to behaviors that fit a different type under certain kinds of stress. And within the following descriptions, you'll hear a unifying thread. None of the types are able to consistently act in ways that would make a child feel secure about the relationship. However, each type has its own unique way of falling short. Also, note that my purpose here is just to provide an outline of the 4 parenting types. I'll discuss the best ways of dealing with emotionally immature parents in later chapters. The emotional parent. Emotional parents are the most infantile of the 4 types. They give the impression that they need to be watched over and handled carefully. It doesn't take much to upset them, and then everyone in the family scrambles to soothe them. When emotional parents disintegrate, they take their children with them into their personal meltdown. Their children experience their despair, rage, or hatred in all its intensity. It's no wonder that everyone in the family feels like they're walking on eggshells. These parents' emotional instability is the most predictable thing about them. At the severe end of the spectrum, these parents are, quite frankly, mentally ill. They may be psychotic or bipolar, or have narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. At times, their unbridled emotionality can even result in suicide attempts or physical attacks on others. People are nervous around them because their emotions can escalate so quickly, and because it's so frightening to see someone you know come unglued. Suicide threats are especially terrifying to children, who feel the crushing burden of trying to keep their parent alive, but don't know what to do. At the milder end of the spectrum, emotional instability is the biggest issue, perhaps in the form of histrionic personality disorder or cyclothymic disorder, characterized by alternating episodes of high and low mood. Regardless of severity, all such parents have difficulty tolerating stress and emotional arousal. They lose their emotional balance and behavioral control in situations mature adults could handle. Of course, substance abuse may make them even more unbalanced and unable to tolerate frustration or distress. Whatever their degree of self-control, these parents are governed by emotion, seeing the world in black and white terms, keeping score, holding grudges, and controlling others with emotional tactics. Their fluctuating moods and reactivity make them unreliable and intimidating. And while they may act helpless and usually see themselves as victims, family life always revolves around their moods, although they often control themselves outside the family, where they can follow a structured role. Within the crucible of the intimate family relationships, they display their full impulsivity, especially if intoxicated. It can be shocking to see how no-holds-barred they can get. Many children of such parents learn to subjugate themselves to other people's wishes. Because they grew up anticipating their parents' stormy, emotional weather, they can be overly attentive to other people's feelings and moods, often to their own detriment. Brittany's story. Despite the fact that Brittany was in her 40s and living independently, her mother, Shonda, still tried to control Brittany with her emotions. Once, when Brittany was in bed sick for several days, Shonda's anxiety mounted until she called Brittany 5 times in one day. She also stopped by because she thought it was time for Brittany to get out of bed, even though Brittany had asked her not to come over. Finally, Brittany latched the screen door so Shonda couldn't get in. Later, Shonda told her, "When you locked me out, I was so angry I wanted to break your door down." When confronted about her intrusiveness, Shonda acted wounded and hid behind the excuse, "I just needed to know you're better." But the truth was, her primary concern was with her own feelings, not with what Brittany needed. The driven parent. Driven parents are the type that tends to look most normal, even appearing exceptionally invested in their children's lives. Being driven, they're always focused on getting things done. Whereas emotional parents are obvious in their immaturity, driven parents seem so invested in their child's success that their egocentrism is hard to see. Most of the time, you wouldn't notice anything unhealthy about them. However, their children may have trouble with either initiative or self-control. Paradoxically, these very involved, hard-working parents often end up with unmotivated, even depressive children. If you look a bit deeper, you can detect the emotional immaturity in these upstanding, responsible people. It shows up in the way they make assumptions about other people, expecting everyone to want and value the same things they do. Their excessive self-focus manifests as a conviction that they know what's good for others. They don't experience self-doubt at a conscious level and prefer to pretend that everything is settled and they already have the answers. Rather than accepting their children's unique interests and life paths, they selectively praise and push what they want to see. Their frequent interference in their children's lives is legendary. In addition, their worry about getting enough done runs them like a motor. Goals take precedence over the feelings of others, including their children. Driven parents usually grew up in an emotionally depriving environment. They learn to get by on their own efforts rather than expecting to be nurtured. Often self-made, they're proud of their independence. They fear that their children will embarrass them by not succeeding, but they can't offer their children the unconditional acceptance that would give them a secure foundation from which to go out and achieve. Whether they mean to or not, driven parents make their children feel evaluated constantly. An example would be a father who makes his kids practice the piano in front of him so he can point out their mistakes. This kind of excessive oversight often sours children on seeking adult help for anything. As a result, in adulthood they may resist connecting with potential mentors. Certain they know the best way to do things, driven parents sometimes do outlandish things. One mother insisted on going to her adult daughter's house to pay her bills because she was sure her daughter wouldn't do it right. Another mother bought her adult son a used car he hadn't asked for and was hurt when he didn't want it. And one young man's father made his son weigh himself every day in front of him when he gained weight. If you think back to the infant attachment studies described at the beginning of this chapter, driven parents seem similar to some of the emotionally insensitive mothers of insecurely attached babies. Out of sync with their child's moment-to-moment experience, they don't adapt themselves to their child's needs. Instead, they push their child toward what they think he or she should be doing. As a result, the children of driven parents always feel they should be doing more, or be doing something other than whatever they are doing. John's story. Although John was 21, he spent a lot of time with his parents and didn't feel any ownership of his life. Describing how he felt around his mother, he said, "I'm constantly on her radar." John felt so pressured by his parents' hopes for him that he'd lost all confidence in his own ideas for his future. As he put it, "I worry so much about what they expect from me. I have no idea what I want. I'm just trying to keep my parents happy and off my case." This was especially true on family vacations, when John felt that his father got really angry if John wasn't having a good enough time. John's parents were so over-involved in his life that he was afraid to set any goals, since that seemed to make them even pushier about what he needed to do next. They were killing his initiative by always urging him to do a bit more or try a little harder. At a conscious level, they wanted the best for John, but they were tone-deaf when it came to respecting and fostering his autonomy. Christine's story. Christine was an attorney with a very domineering father, Joseph, who constantly pushed her to be a success. Early in our work together, she described her childhood like this: "My father controlled me. He couldn't stand anyone having a different opinion. It was absolutely intolerable to him. I was so afraid of making the wrong choice that I made a lot of decisions based on fear. It was as if my father completely owned me. Even in college I had to be home by 11, which was extremely embarrassing, but I wouldn't have dreamed of challenging him." Joseph even tried to control Christine's thoughts. If Christine came up with an idea her father didn't like, his response was immediate: "Don't even think about it." Joseph also had lack of empathy that made him a terrible teacher. He couldn't sense what might be terrifying to a child, so he tried to teach Christine to swim by literally dropping her in a pool. As Christine put it, "He would command me to do well, but didn't offer any guidance or help. I was simply ordered to be a success." To all outward appearances, Christine did become a success, but on the inside she felt a tremendous insecurity, like she didn't really know what she was doing. The passive parent. Passive parents aren't angry or pushy like the other three types, but they still have negative effects. They passively acquiesce to dominant personalities and often partner with more intense types who are also immature, which makes sense given that people with similar emotional maturity levels are attracted to one another. Compared to the other types, these parents seem more emotionally available, but only up to a point. When things get too intense, they become passive, withdraw emotionally, and hide their heads in the sand. They don't offer their children any real limits or guidance to help them navigate the world. They may love you, but they can't help you. Passive parents are as immature and self-involved as the other types, but their easygoing and often playful ways make them much more lovable than the other three types, emotional, driven, or rejecting. They are often the favorite parent and can show some empathy for their children, as long as doing so doesn't get in the way of their needs. And because they can be as egocentric as the other types, passive parents may use their children to meet their own emotional needs. primarily their need to be the focus of someone's affectionate attention. They enjoy the child's innocent openness and can get on the child's level in a delightful way. The child loves his or her time with this parent, but because the child is often filling the parent's need for an admiring, attentive companion, it becomes a kind of emotional incest. This kind of relationship is never completely comfortable for the child, because it poses the risk of making the other parent jealous and may even feel sexualized. Children wisely know not to expect or ask for much help from these parents. While passive parents often enjoy their children, have fun with them, and make them feel special, the children sense that their parents aren't really there for them in any essential way. In fact, these parents are famous for turning a blind eye to family situations that are harmful to their children, leaving their kids to fend for themselves. When the mother is the passive parent, she may stay with a partner who demeans or abuses her children because she doesn't have an independent income. Such mothers often numb themselves to what's going on around them. For example, one mother later referred to her husband's violent attacks on their children with the mild statement, "Daddy could be tough sometimes." In their own upbringing, passive parents often learn to stay out of the line of fire, keeping a low profile and subjugating themselves to stronger personalities. As adults, it doesn't occur to them that they have a mission not only to have fun with their own children, but to protect them. Instead, they go into a kind of trance during the worst times, retreating into themselves or finding other passive ways to weather the storm. In addition to unthinkingly abandoning their children when the going gets rough, these parents may leave the family if they get a chance at a happier life. If the passive but more emotionally connected parent leaves the family for any reason, the wound to the child can be especially deep, since the abandonment came from the parent who meant the most to the child. Children who adored a passive parent can become adults who make excuses for other people's abandoning behavior. As children, they believed nothing could be done about their childhood situation, and that the passive parent was truly helpless. They're often taken aback by the idea that their wonderful, nice parent actually had a responsibility to stand up for them when they couldn't protect themselves as children. They've never considered that parents have a duty to put their children's emotional welfare at least on an even footing with their own interests. Molly's story. Molly's mother was a short-tempered, physically abusive woman who worked long hours and usually came home in a foul mood. Her father was a sweet, affectionate man who was usually in good spirits. He was fond of puttering in the garage when he wasn't at work, so Molly was mostly left in the care of her abusive, demeaning older sister, apparently with no consideration of how Molly might be treated. Molly's safe haven was her relationship with her father. His kindness was the single bright spot and source of love in her life, and she both worshipped him and felt protective of him. It never occurred to her to expect him to protect her. For example, once when her mother flew into a rage and was beating Molly in the den, she heard her father banging pots around in the kitchen. She interpreted this as his way of letting her know he was still there for her. She had no expectation that he should step in and stop the abuse. This is a poignant example of how emotionally deprived children try to put a positive spin on their favorite parent's behavior no matter what. Molly also had a slight stutter, and one time on a trip to an amusement park, Molly's sister and her friends teased Molly about it so much that she became hysterical. Molly's father laughed it off, rather than admonishing the older kids or attending to Molly's feelings. On the drive home, everyone laughed uproariously as they took turns imitating Molly's speech impediment. The rejecting parent. Rejecting parents seem to have a wall around them. They don't want to spend time with their children and seem happiest if others leave them alone to do what they want. Their children get the feeling the parent would be fine if they didn't exist. These parents' irritated demeanor teaches their children not to approach them, something one person described as running towards someone only to have the door slammed in her face. They summarily reject attempts to draw them into affectionate or emotional interactions. If pushed for a response, They may become angry or even abusive. These parents are capable of punitive physical attacks. Rejecting parents are also the least empathetic of the 4 types. They often use avoidance of eye contact to signal their distaste for emotional intimacy, or sometimes employ a blank look or hostile stare designed to make others go away. These parents rule the home, with family life revolving around their wishes. A well-known example of this type is the aloof and scary father, a man with no emotional warmth for his children. Everything revolves around him, and the family instinctively tries not to upset him. With a rejecting father, it's easy to feel apologetic for existing. But mothers can be rejecting too. Children of rejecting parents come to see themselves as bothers and irritants, causing them to give up easily, whereas more secure children tend to keep making requests or complaining to get what they want. This can have serious ramifications later in life when, as adults, these rejected children find it hard to ask for what they need. Beth's story. Beth's mother, Rosa, never showed any enthusiasm about spending time with her. When Beth visited, Rosa resisted hugs and immediately found something to criticize about Beth's appearance. She usually urged Beth to call a relative as soon as Beth walked in the door, as though to redirect her elsewhere. If Beth suggested spending time together, Rosa acted irritated and told Beth she was too dependent on her. When Beth telephoned her mother, anything Beth said was usually cut short, as Rosa quickly found an excuse to get off the phone, often giving the phone to Beth's father. Exercise. Determining your parent's type. To assess which of these 4 types might fit your parent, go through the following lists and decide which characteristics you associate with your parent, bearing in mind that parents of any type can exhibit traits of the other types when very stressed. Characteristics of emotional immaturity common to all types include self-preoccupation, low empathy, disregard for boundaries, resisting emotional intimacy, poor communication, an absence of self-reflection, refusal to repair relationship problems, emotional reactivity, impulsiveness, and problem-sustaining emotional closeness. As before, if you'd like to complete this assessment for more than one parent or step-parent, use the downloadable version of this exercise available at www.newharbinger.com/31700. Emotional parent. Is preoccupied with his or her own needs. Has low empathy. Is enmeshed and not respectful of boundaries. Is defensively non-intimate. Doesn't engage in reciprocal communication. Just talks about himself or herself. Isn't self-reflective. Has poor relationship repair skills. Is reactive, not thoughtful. Is either too close or too distant. Blows up or cuts others off. Has frightening or intimidating emotional intensity. Expects his or her child to provide soothing and doesn't think about the child's needs. Likes to pretend he or she doesn't run the show. Sees himself or herself as a victim. Driven parent. Is preoccupied with his or her own needs. Has low empathy. Is enmeshed and not respectful of boundaries. Is defensively non-intimate. Doesn't engage in reciprocal communication, just talks about himself or herself. Isn't self-reflective. Has poor relationship repair skills. Is reactive, not thoughtful. Is either too close or too distant. Has rigid values and perfectionist expectations. Is goal-obsessed and busy, with machine-like tunnel vision. Sees his or her child as a reflection without considering what the child wants. Likes to run the show. Sees himself or herself as a fixer. Passive parent. Is preoccupied with his or her own needs. Has limited empathy. Is enmeshed and not respectful of boundaries. can be sporadically emotionally intimate, engages only minimally in reciprocal communication, mostly talks about himself or herself, isn't self-reflective, has limited relationship repair skills, can be thoughtful on occasion, is either too close or too distant, can be kindly and fun, but not protective, has a laissez-faire attitude that all is well, is affectionate toward the child but doesn't stand up for him or her, likes someone else to run the show or be the bad guy, sees himself or herself as mellow and good-natured. Rejecting parent. Is preoccupied with his or her own needs. Shows no empathy. Has impenetrable boundaries. Seems disconnected and hostile. Seldom engages in communication. Isn't self-reflective. Has no relationship repair skills. Is reactive, attacking, and demeaning. Is too distant. Ignores his or her child or can be rageful toward the child. Is often rejecting and angry. Sees his or her child as a bother and doesn't want to get near the child. Likes to mock and dismiss. Sees himself or herself as independent from others. Summary. All 4 types of emotionally immature parents are self-involved and insensitive, and therefore emotionally unavailable to their children. Their lack of empathy makes them hard to communicate with and difficult to connect with. They're all afraid of genuine emotion and seek to control others for their own comfort. None of them make their children feel emotionally seen. All are draining to be around in their own ways, and ultimately all interactions center around them. In addition, all are incapable of true interpersonal reciprocity. Although there are 4 general types of emotionally immature parent, their children tend to fall into just 2 main categories: internalizers and externalizers. In the next chapter, we'll take a look at these 2 very different coping styles.